Hello, I'm Eir. I come from a small island outside of Bergen City on the west coast of Norway. Um, I'm here to have a series of video blogs about Yule. There's a lot of questions arises about Yule this time of year. And there's a lot of information to try to go through, so I decided to part it up in different parts. I think one thing that is important that I mention is that this information is something that I have gathered from a variety of sources, everything from historians, theory and speculations, papers, and works based on original sources. I read the original sources in original language. Some sources are pre-conversion, some of the sources are from the period of conversions, and some are post-conversion texts that were written in a time frame right after the conversion of Scandinavia. I also bring up mentionings from other sources observing Norse traditions. They were mainly different monks and priests, among them Brede and Adam from Bremen. This also contains my observations, thoughts, and well, what we famously call UPG, unverified personal gnosis. I think that when looking at Yule, it's important that we look at the patterns that leads us up there. People like to take certain heathen events and celebration and take them out of context and make them a kind of an exclusive event without any relations to the things that are going on around the season prior and the season after Yule, for example. The first thing I'm going to mention is that the year was split in two. They didn't have 4 seasons like we have today, they had 2. They observed it as the winter season and the summer season. So that would put the end of December and up until mid-January as midwinter. The months, they went from middle of our month to the middle of our month. They went from full moon to full moon or from new moon to new moon. Here in the far north, some of these observations and the count could probably get a little off track because, for example, in the summer, because of nattleysa, the lack of night, the constant light up north, and well, there's more light the further north you get, causes it hard to observe the moon in the summer. And in opposition, the sun can be difficult to observe in the winter, at least parts of it. Because, well, there isn't a lot of sunlight. The further north you go, the less sunlight there is. Parts of Norway is shrouded in eternal night for winter. The darkest days of winter was called Skamdegi, and that was really the time that we're going into now, in the end of Yule. And Yule is the month that goes from the middle of November to the middle of December. Yule also means Yule, by the way, which is one of Odin's names. A question that I get a lot is, when did the new year start? And we don't know that for sure. But given that people's age was measured in winters, and events was measured in winters since this or this, I will get more into that in a thing I'm doing about measurements and time and weight and stuff. But we can be pretty sure that the New Year's happens somewhere in the winter part of the year. Some speculation goes towards autumn. This can be connected to the fact that we know that in the 1100s the New Year's was considered to be 1st of September. But again, there are contradicting sources on this. Some speculate it must have been around midwinter, this because of a kind of a formula that was used around toasts and stuff, which was also Frida. This was a skål, a toast. We also know that some people speculate that it was towards Sigsfot of Sumarmål, which was the end of the winter and the start of the summer. So this was in early spring, in the middle of April. Now, we can speculate on these different sources, but they are contradicting, and we don't know for exact. Maybe they observe the whole winter as being a start of a new year. It's also important to observe that the word year was not used a lot. År was not used, for example, to reference a man's age, as I mentioned before. So we could speculate if they use that word as we use year today. People counted their time mostly in winters. Now this toast and blessing that was for Åsa Frida was held in the winter time and around the Yule split and the celebrations that is connected to Yule. The months of the late summer are the harvest months. You have first Heathen, which is pretty much hay month. And well, the name kind of explains itself, doesn't it? This was the time when they would gather the hay. And the hay, again, would decide how much livestock they could keep alive over winter. So I'm not randomly talking about the late of summer in a video about Yule. I am trying to show a pattern here that is essential. Now the next month after that is Tvilund, which means a double month or 2 months. We don't know what's behind that month name. But we know that this month was also called Kurskolmånad, and that means grain cutting month. So in this month you were harvesting your grain, and this again went to the next month, which was Höstmånad, which pretty much means either harvest or autumn month. This is when their autumn solstice was, and this is when the last parts of harvests were happening. This was when the latest fruits and vegetables were ready. Things like crab apples. We didn't really have a lot of fruit up here, so they would harvest what was available. Berries was something there was a lot of, and they could stretch in harvest everything from mid-August now to actually mid-September. Now, these 3 months can seem like they have very little relevance to Yule, but that is actually not true. They do. Because if you look, for example, at the hay month is when they would gather the food for their animals to survive over winter. So this was the month that decided how much meat they would have for winter, how much they would have to slaughter, how much they were capable of keeping alive over winter. And as such, it actually is connected. The next month, grain month, we know is connected because the grain would be used in rituals around Yule, for example, to make the beer. I will get into more about that later. Now the winter months starts off with Gormandur, which means slaughter month, but it also means month of Gor. So in between this month, the last harvest month, Höstmånad and Gormandur, you had Vetranat, winter's nights, and that was the first of the winter bloods. There are different speculations there, whether or not it belonged to Frey or if it belonged to the Disir. We will look more at that later, but it was important to realize that this was kind of the blood that kicked everything off. This was where everything started, and this was the end of the harvest. This was the first slaughter maybe for the slaughter season, and they had picked themselves a nice blood animal and they were slaughtering it. And they were going to prepare for a month of slaughter and preservation of food. Now these preparations going through Gormandur are directly connected to the celebrations of Yule. Now there are contradicting sources on Vetranat, on winter blot, or whatever you want to call it, winter nights. But what we do know is this was a blot to thank for the harvest. It was a blot to wish the winter welcome. It was a blot for a good winter, and a kind of a reflection upon the harvest that had been. We know that it's speculated to have occurred over 3 or more days in mid-October. and it was celebrated specifically in Iceland the 18th to the 11th, and this was the celebration to start the beginning of winter. In Viggo Saga, it says very specifically that this was a DC flute. But we're not going to go too much into this. I'm going to have an own harvest video posted at a point a little more correct for the timing. Simply, I feel like posting a harvest post in the middle of winter is just not where I'm going to go with it. So. Now, as mentioned, this particular blot led us into Gardermother, a month of war, a month of slaughter, and a month to consider how much to slaughter, and how many animals, how much of your livestock you could keep alive over winter, and what animals was the most suited for blooting. Now, there are a lot of discussion out there what animals was used to bloot. A lot of people get surprised when I say that the animals actually mentioned the most in context of blooting is horse. So we can consider that, I guess. But other animals are also shown to be significant for the slaughter. Rams, goats, pigs, all have a connection to this season and this time of year. Now we can see the clearly elements of prestige and wealth and the material culture of our ancestors in some of these things, because the more you could gather of hay, the more land you had, the more prosperous land you had, the more livestock you had, the more livestock you could keep alive, and more likely the better blooting animal you had. Now I'm not going to dwell too deep into that here, the prestige and wealth thing, but I'm going to say that it is entirely possible that common folk in poorer settlements, like farm families, didn't hold their own bloot, but more that this was held by the more prestigious and powerful figures of their community, and that this was held as a kind of a common bragging kind of bragging right, gather the family, gather the at. Now, all these preparations led you into the month of Yule, the month that is linguistically connected to Yule. Yule is also recorded to have held different customs that are all connected to Yule. We can look a little bit at the different names of Yule and the origins of the word. You have Yule, Julablut, Jukonat, Midvinter, and so on. It is said that some of the most important tree celebration was Yule or Hokonat. That was like the most important of the three ones that gets repeated the most through sources, which was Vetrenet, Winter's Night, Midwinter's Night, and then Sumamol, Summer Blut or Sigsblut. But the most important of it was Yule, and this was celebrated originally from our most concrete sources in mid of January, so now it starts getting confusing already. Yulner is another name for Yule. This was the mid-month, November to mid-December, and the thing with Yulner is that this is also a name for Odin. In the Scandinavia, this particular holiday has been allowed to keep its original Germanic name, and in English they have kept it in the archaic form of Juletida. The origins to the word is definitely unclear. The oldest reference we have for Yule is a fragment from Codex Ambrosianus. I've never actually been sure how that is pronounced in English, which is part of a Gothic calendar that was written sometime in the 500s or 600s. It was overwritten with a sentence that I can barely even remember. I don't remember, but it was pretty much interpreted as November, the first month of Yule, or November, the month before Yule. Then again, in around 700s, the Anglo-Saxon, I think, monk, and his name was Bede, wrote that the Anglo-Saxon calendar had the months Giola and Giuli, which I guess will be about December and January. From what I recall, I don't from the top of my head right now. What we know is that the 25th of December was counted the first day of the Heathen Anglo-Saxon calendar, or at least I read that. I might be wrong on that, so if somebody wants to correct me, feel free. But this was celebrated to the honor of the mother goddess. Now we get more complicated. Yule comes from the Anglo-Saxon. No, I had some writing here. Giol or Gihol, Giola or Gioli. I'm sure I didn't pronounce those, so the former one's right. But the first one of these kind of references the 12-day celebration to Yule. And the last one indicates the month until Yule, and where Eragiola was the period for the Yule feast, December, and Afteragiola was the period after the Yule celebration, so January. Now, what they have done is that they have been comparing the different Germanic languages, the linguists, and they have looked into what can possibly be the root of this word. Now, I am not even going to try to pronounce it, I think, but it's pretty much Hula, and they presume that this would be the Proto-Germanic word that is the origins to both the Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian version of the word. What's interesting is to look at the language Finnish, which, indifferent to many of the other Germanic languages, didn't change much. So in Finnish, the word now exists as Jula, which means high time, celebration time. Whilst they also have picked up later again the word Yule into Julu, which then means Yule. Now, as I said, the Scandinavian languages kept their original pronunciation, and the pronunciation of the word connects it to the month Ylir. So you see the contradictions in the sources starts out really fast. When was this held? And that's a question I keep getting asked, and it's not a very simple answer to that, and we will get closer to it. Now, looking into this ancient Germanic word, they have been trying to well, they just don't know its origins or its early roots. They don't have any proof, but there's been plenty of speculation. And one of the speculation is towards a Indo-European word, which was connected to Yule, which sounds exactly like Yule, doesn't it? But it actually means wheel. And what they have suspected is that it has a Indo-European origin word that means go around. So then it would indicate that the word Yule and somehow has a connection to the passing of the year and the circle of the year. But this is not something that there is any consensus for. This is something that some linguists have speculated on, but not been able to clear out completely. So this means that presumingly, possibly, these words are just appearance similar, but they don't have any common root. And that is generally the linguistic consensus on the word's origin, that it is not connected to the word Yule. So now we're looking at the word here that doesn't really reveal a lot of its origins or its meaning unless it is connected to wheel, and the ones who speculate on that is the ones who are right in this matter. But if they're not, then we are left with a word that doesn't hold any deep explanation unless we look at Finnish, where the earliest version of their word means celebration or high time. So a point of time of Heathen. I'm lacking a way to translate it, so I'm going to just sum it up there. So what we're looking at is a celebration of a important time of the year which had a lot of spiritual and religious focus. And I'm going to end my first video there, and we will start with that, and then we will I will begin with a new one, and where I start looking into when Yule was held and what time frames it possibly was at. So until then, bye bye.